Hi, my name is Robin Wong, and in this video I want to debunk a popular myth exposed to the right and why I don't practice that for low light photography. Let's do this. I will first talk about the origin of exposed to the right technique. Why is it so popular amongst the landscape photographers? And then I will prove to you with irrefutable evidence why it is not applicable to low light photography. Some photographers exclaim that if you're dealing with low light shooting, if you use very high ISO numbers, exposed to the right technique is the best method to deal with high ISO noise and to get cleaner and better results. I disagree with that. You see, exposed to the right technique was originally intended for landscape photography, not low light photography. Exposed to the right was invented and popularized by Michael Reichman from Luminous Landscape. It simply means you intentionally overexpose your image so that more light will oversaturate the image sensor, having the pixels recording more data. This will in turn maximize dynamic range, which will be more ideal for landscape photography. Some people will say that, hey, since exposed to the right can maximize dynamic range, this in turn will also minimize high ISO noise. It is logical. However, it is not that simple. Let's get back to the basics. There are three camera settings that affect exposure: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Both shutter speed and aperture will control the real amount of light that comes into the camera, directly affecting image quality. However, the ISO is not a real exposure control. The ISO is a fake control. It is an electronic gain to boost exposure artificially. This part is extremely important. ISO is a fake exposure. So how does this translate to real life shooting scenario? I will give you a very simple and clear-cut example. Say that I'm shooting a live music performance. The stage is dimly lit. The singer will move a lot, she will dance, she will bang her head. So we need fast shutter speed, minimum 1/250th of a second. We cannot go lower than that, or else we'll capture too much blur. We need to deliver sharp images. I will use probably a prime lens 45 f1.8 or 75 f1.8 to take advantage of the f1.8 open aperture to gather as much light as possible. Now, these two exposure settings, the shutter speed and aperture, are pretty much fixed to gather as much light as possible to maintain a high quality capture. So my final adjustment consideration goes to the ISO, which is a fake artificial electronic gain to boost the exposure artificially. I will set the ISO to match the shutter speed and aperture. It can be 1600, 3200, 6400, whatever the ISO needs to be. I will set the number to get a perfectly exposed image. Where does exposed to the right come into this equation? According to some other photographers who claim that exposed to the right works for low light photography and high ISO shooting, they will intentionally increase the high ISO numbers more than necessary. Say that instead of using 3200, they'll use 6400, or instead of using 6400, they'll shoot with 12,800 to gain more exposure, to overexpose the image, and they claim that by doing so, they can get away with cleaner and better image. I don't think so. Because high ISO or the ISO numbers, as you adjust them, they do not change the amount of light that is captured by the image sensor. We cannot change the quality of the light that is captured on the pixel. So the pixel quality does not improve even as we increase the ISO numbers. And I'm going to prove just that. Here are the ingredients. First, of course, this little guy here, the Lego Robin. Next up, my trusty EM5 Mark III and my favorite lens, the 45 f1.8. And finally, some cheap China-made LED light. Now that we have the Lego Robin and the LED light set up, it is time to do a simplistic test. The first test is between ISO 3200 properly exposed versus ISO 6400 exposed to the right, one stop overexposed. I will fix the aperture and the shutter speed. Of course, this will not change between these two tests. The only thing that will change is the adjustment of the ISO from 3200 properly exposed. As you can see, the metering here, it shows 0. And then later I will shoot this against ISO 6400, one stop overexposed. Let's start with 3200. This is properly exposed. And then I will change this to 6400, which is +1 exposure overexposed. Then we will compare this in the post-processing software. Similarly, I will change this to 6400 properly exposed. I will take one shot and I will compare this again with one stop overexposure at ISO 12800. And we will see if the one stop overexposed exposed to the right image will give us any real benefit when it comes to high ISO shooting. I have shot a series of images and I have sufficient sample size to choose from. This was the ISO 3200 properly exposed image. We are going to compare this against the next image. This was ISO 6400 one stop overexposed. I'm going to bring back the exposure down to -1 EV to match the previous image. The exposed to the right believers will claim that this is the superior image. We will see if that's the case. Going into side-by-side preview, now the left we have the ISO 3200 and on the right we have the ISO 6400 but overexposed by one stop and corrected. Comparing them in full screen, zooming in, it is very, very clear immediately that the ISO 3200 image managed to preserve more fine details. It looks sharper. The ISO 6400 overexposed and corrected exhibits loss of sharpness. The difference is quite clear. Going into the darker regions, looking at the high ISO noise profile, ISO 3200 versus ISO 6400, I don't see any difference. They look the same to me, and this is not surprising because, as I've mentioned, increasing the ISO does nothing to improve the quality of pixel, of the quality of light that is captured by the camera. Moving along, I will compare the ISO 6400 properly exposed image versus the next image, which is the ISO 12800 but overexposed by one stop. Similarly, I will bring this down to -1 EV and we will compare this side by side against the properly exposed ISO 6400. I believe the pattern will be the same. Going into the full screen mode, on the left is ISO 6400, on the right is ISO 12800 overexposed but corrected. Going into the fine details, we can see that ISO 6400 properly exposed has a lot better resolution, the sharpness is better, and ISO 12800 has more severe loss of sharpness. This is not surprising. There's more aggressive noise reduction, and when you shoot a high ISO, it's not just the noise problem that you have to worry about, but your image will look a lot more painterly, it will look more mushy. Looking at the noise profile in the darker region, the noise profile looks the same as expected. No, shooting at high ISO exposed to the right, increasing the ISO number will not increase your image quality. It will not give you a cleaner image. Myth debunked. I hope that my simplistic test is sufficient to prove to you that exposed to the right does not work for high ISO low light shooting. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video useful, please give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you have not already done so. And please do consider buying me a coffee that will definitely keep me and this channel going. Until the next video, please do stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.